Hello, welcome or welcome back. My name is Ari, and I've been seeing a lot of fall recommendation videos go around, and I kind of wanted to throw my recommendations out there as well. Now, I wanted to do this video in like a nice cozy fall sweater and all snuggled up and cute and cozy, but it's like 85 degrees outside Fahrenheit. So I've got ice water and a t-shirt, but it's a football team, so that's fall, right? Anyway, my fall recommendations. I wanted to focus on books that aren't necessarily very popular right now. Some of these books were popular a few years ago, and kind of like fell off in popularity, so maybe you've read them already, but maybe you haven't, and then you forgot that it's on your TBR, and now's the perfect time for you to pick it back up. And then some of these are just books that never have ever been popular, and most people haven't heard of them, and I think they deserve more readers. I'm gonna break this down into 3 categories and have like 3 or 4 books each category. The first thing I think of with fall is back to school. So I want to recommend some books with like fall vibes school settings. And the first one is not really a book, but it's like a whole series. This is a completed series. This is the Speculative series by Naomi Novik. This series takes place in a magical school, and the students are sent to the magical school and they have to live there for 3 years and graduate or die. And a lot of them end up dying. So I really like this. The main character is a very unlikable character. She's basically destined to be evil. She's extremely powerful with any sort of like evil magic, but she doesn't want to be evil. So she fights against what the school wants to teach her as far as evil magic, and has to work harder than anybody else just to do the simplest good magic spell. So I really like this series, highly recommend. Again, it is a completed series, so check it out. Next up, on a weird turn, I've got Catherine House. This is a boarding school. I don't think it's necessarily set in the fall time, but it's set in rural Pennsylvania. It's very atmospheric, and it's a lot weird. This is like dark academia, kind of fantasy, sci-fi, kind of horror. It doesn't really make sense. This is all vibes. Like everything about this book is just vibes. There's no plot. There's no conclusion. It's just the vibes, and the vibes tell me fall. This book definitely isn't for everybody. If you can't stand like not having answers, you probably won't like this book. But I liked this book. One of the lesser known titles by a very, very popular author, The Rhythmatist. Say that 5 times fast, by Brandon Sanderson. This is a young adult book that follows a young man named Joel, and in this universe there is a magic system that is based off of geometry, and the magic is inherent but the geometry is learned, and Joel is just a prodigy with this geometry, and he can make the most like intense magical formulas happen because he's so good at figuring out the geometry, but he has no inherent magic, so he can't actually cast any of these spells that he's designed. And this kind of follows him through school while he's trying to figure out how he can be successful as a rhythmatist with absolutely no magical ability at all. It's not Cosmere, so not a lot of people have heard of it or read it, but if you haven't and you like Brandon Sanderson, maybe pick this one up. Next category is fall fantasy, and I'm not necessarily somebody who just reads fantasy in the fall or even necessarily associates fantasy with fall time, but a lot of people do. Let me give you some fall fantasy recommendations. Now this next one is pretty popular even right now, and it's another series, but that is the Rook and Rose series by M.A. Carrick. So 3 books. Book 3 just came out recently, Labyrinth's Heart. And again, completed series, so you can pick it up, read it right now, and you're all good to go. This basically follows a con artist. It's not necessarily set in the fall, but the universe is really big on these masks. So they have a lot of religious events that requires people wearing masks, and for some reason mask just gives me Halloween vibes because you dress up in a costume for Halloween. So very pretty covers, very, very interesting political heist-like fantasy. If you're into tarot or astrology, the magic systems in this book are based off of astrology. Like, one of them is based off of astrology and one of them is based off of, like, tarot. So if you're into that, you might like this too. For me in fall, I really like reading something that's all vibes, which I mentioned earlier with Catherine House. I can curl up with a nice hot beverage, tea, coffee, hot chocolate, whatever you like, curled up in a cozy blanket and read something that doesn't necessarily require a lot of brain power, nor does it require a lot of, like, investment. I don't need to worry about following the plot. I don't need to worry about the characters being offed. I just want beautiful writing and lots of vibes. So for this one, I want to recommend The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This is a beautiful, mostly plotless, just cozy story. A boy finds a mystery book in a library and then kind of like follows the clues in the books into this like fantasy, almost Alice in Wonderland like world. And nothing's really happening. It's just beautifully told and a little mysterious and a little bit weird, and I liked it a whole lot. So highly recommend this as well. Again, if you want answers or want to understand anything, probably not the book for you, but if you just want beautiful words written on a page, check this one out. Next up, one of the ugliest covers for one of the best books I've ever read, The Red Tree by Caitlin Kiernan. Now, this one gives me fall vibes just because specifically the red tree. Like, trees turn red in the fall as the leaves are changing, so it just makes me think of fall. I don't even know if this is set in fall. Additionally, while this is fantasy, it also has horror elements. So if you liked House of Leaves, or you liked episode 13, you like the idea of these like liminal spaces where time doesn't really seem to exist, or rooms, hallways, places that seem to be too big for the space that they're contained within, I think you will really like The Red Tree. Please don't judge this book by the cover, but let's get this popular enough that they redo the cover on this one. And that brings me to the final section of my fall recs, which obviously has to be horror. I'm newer to horror. If you guys have horror suggestions, please leave them in the comment, especially ghost stories. Ghost stories are absolutely my favorite kind of horror, but they have to be done well. Actually, they don't even have to be done well. I tend to like them even when they aren't done well, but I would probably only recommend them if they're done well. So let's get into what I have for you now. Only one of them's really a ghost story. I just realized. First, I want to recommend Sister Maiden Monster. Now, this is body horror. This is gross and creepy, and you're gonna be a little bit nauseous reading like what happens to these people. The virus tears across the globe and starts transforming people in gross ways. I'm just gonna kind of leave it at that. You follow 3 different ladies throughout this book and like different, and their different experiences throughout this pandemic. But yeah, like I said, this is just like gross body horror, but it is one of the most beautifully disgusting things I've ever read. Next up, I'm gonna recommend a literary ghost and recommend The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters. This is a historical fiction. This is not even really horror or fantasy. This follows a doctor in rural England post World War II. He kind of gets involved with this upper class family who live in this dilapidated mansion because they don't really have any money at all left. They have the title, they have the land. The land's not really worth anything. They can't really afford to keep up with the repairs on this mansion, and it's just kind of like falling apart. And the doctor is not part of the family. He's just kind of like an observer from the outside. He wants to be wealthy. He wants to be nobility. He wants to be entitled. But he comes from a poor background and just happened to get training as a doctor because he was in the war. And this man is just kind of an awful, self-centered narcissist. But that just makes like the events of what happened even more interesting because you just don't like the narrator. It's never really answered like, is this an actual haunting or is something else going on? But the whole vibe of this book is very creepy. If you're kind of into ghosts but don't necessarily want a ghost story, you just want historical fiction, I would definitely check this out. And then if you really like ghosts and kind of want to get more into historical fiction, you might like this as well. But Sarah Waters is an amazing writer. And then the last book I want to recommend is The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher. This one gives me fall vibes just because the setting of this is in kind of like a dead, swampy land, and just the idea of all of nature like slowly dying through fall is kind of fall vibes here. It's also horror, obviously perfect for fall. This woman discovers like a hole in the wall of her uncle's oddities museum, and then discovers this liminal space that shouldn't be able to fit in this hole in the wall. And then she goes through there and finds this like river of creepy willows and all of these like underground bunkers and creepy phrases and words, generally creepy things. And her and a friend kind of explore this place, initially with like, what is this at first? And then like out of fear trying to escape back home later. This is my favorite T. Kingfisher book so far. I also think it's the first one I read by her, but I recommend really anything by T. Kingfisher, but this one has some really good fall horror vibes. That is my stack of fall recommendations. What do you recommend people read in fall? Give me your favorite fall book down in the comments below, and I will see you next week with a 24-hour young adult reading vlog. Bye!